Now that we're into the new year and the busyness of the holidays has settled down, I can finally get started on last year's plan to get my books selling better. If you're new here, hello, my name is Beth, and I'm an author of epic fantasy, romantic fantasy, fairy tales, and just fantasy stuff. It's all fantasy. And first, let me clarify that it's not that my books don't sell. I have a steady trickle of book sales all year long, but right now it doesn't cover much more than my production expenses for putting out new books and just existing as an author. That's already a pretty big accomplishment when production costs like good editing and nice covers can really add up. And while I do as much of it on my own as I can, there are some costs I can't eliminate. A lot of these are hidden expenses, like the cost to keep an author website, newsletter service prices, business licenses, and other things you might not immediately think of. So being able to cover those costs is a reasonable amount of success, especially considering that marketing my books is my biggest weakness. Last year, I finished writing my epic fantasy series 𝗯cie_ance_, which means I currently have no unfinished projects on the table. My next few books will be standalone stories, so nobody's waiting for me to finish anything, and that means it is the perfect time to change gears and move from focusing on writing as much as I can to learning how to market the books I already have. That was supposed to be last year's goal, but I didn't have time because of my writing schedule. At the moment, I have 23 fantasy books on the market, but that doesn't mean I have 23 books to market, because 15 of those are serials, which means they're installments in a series that must be read in sequential order. Those 15 books only provide 3 entry points to my work. 2 lead into 6-book epics, and then one of them is a trilogy of novellas, which add up to one big omnibus that's long enough to be an epic on its own. Out of the other 8 books, there are 2 novellas that I don't market because the return on them isn't worth it, and the remaining 6 are in 2 separate series of standalone stories that are better if read in chronological order, but all of those books can be read by themselves. I have several other fantasy books I've written, but they're really more like novellas and short story collections that aren't available on retailers because they go along with the epics as bonus material, so they don't matter here and I'm not including them in the count or in my marketing plans. I've had people ask before why I would continue to devote all of my time to writing when my books weren't turning a healthy profit, and the short answer is that a few years ago I had some health issues that left me unsure how much time I would have to write the stories I'd already started. And as a fantasy reader myself, who has been burned by too many unfinished series, I didn't want to leave any chance that I might be finished before my stories were finished. And between what my books were bringing in and a little money that my parents gave me from my uncle's estate when he passed away, I had what I needed to complete everything left unfinished, so I made that my primary goal. Since then, my health has improved, concerns have abated, I guess, and I'm now able to change my focus to making these books work for me, beginning with the most expensive series of all. That would be 𝗯cie_ance_, which happens to also be one of the series that's performing poorly. I know it's normal to have books that don't sell as well. You're always going to have something that doesn't land well, and then you always have a few books that do great and are always your leaders in profit. But this series has really suffered from the problem of being a long epic fantasy series in a world where, for the exact reasons that I pushed so hard to finish it, readers have been burned, and often they won't even begin reading a series like this until it's complete. I know that's the case with this because not long after the last book came out at the end of last summer, people finally started giving the series a chance. It was the same way when I published the Snake's Blood Saga, which was my first epic fantasy, and now that's one of my top sellers with the series being completed. Unfortunately for me, 𝗯cie_ance_, was also the most expensive series I've ever created, between the books being really long, like they're the longest of all my books. You can see it's pretty chunky, and then the covers are done by a professional artist whose work I love, but it's pricey and the series is pretty far in the red for expenses, and it was what ate up my publishing nest egg from what my parents gave me. So if I want to keep exclusively using my book earnings to finance new releases, I need this series to pick up and recover what I've invested in it, and the series being complete means that this is the right time. So I'm starting the year by doing a full audit of this book series, adjusting the sales copy and categories and keywords, and and just making the whole thing overall a stronger package. I had a few naysayers in author groups tell me that the covers were boring and needed to be changed, but I love the covers and I won't be changing them, not just because I love them, because I did that with Snake's Blood when those covers weren't selling, but because I know these work. I have proof that these covers work and that they appeal to the readers I want, because when I did a book signing back in October, I had a man walk past my table about 7 times, staring at it the whole time before he finally came over and said he had to have it. I asked him if he wanted me to tell him about the book, and he said no, and just had me sign it, and he bought it and he left. That's also not the first time that that has happened. This cover gets people to my event tables. People see it from across the room and they're drawn to it, and that has happened at every event that I've done since this book came out. So it's clearly working for the readers I want. So the covers don't have to change, and that's good because that would be more expense piled on top of what I've already spent. But even though the packaging is excellent, I've had a lot of challenges with this series, and to an extent I'm not sure why. I've always suspected part of the problem might be that epic fantasy as a genre isn't always very friendly to female writers. We see a lot of this with current series being squeezed out of the epic category and exclusively labeled as 𝗯ance, but like in a derogatory way, as if 𝗯ance isn't valid as a genre on its own. And if not 𝗯ance, it gets labeled as YA, even though it's clearly meant for a more mature audience. Back when I was still pursuing traditional publishing with the Snake's Blood saga, I had a female agent tell me that women don't write epic fantasy for adult audiences, they wrote YA. And while I've been annoyed by that forever, I also recognize that I can't fight the tide on my own. And since this series does feature characters in their late teens and the content isn't risque or anything, I can bill it as YA, and I might have better luck marketing it that way. Hold on, camera, we'll charge. But anyway, that whole thing is frustrating because this series is absolutely written and modeled after all the adult epic fantasy I've read, where the young man who's just come of age is suddenly more than he bargained for and he sets off on the hero's journey. But I am not too proud to try a new approach if something isn't working. And the people who would be put off by it being in the YA categories are probably also going to be put off by the fact that I am a woman choosing to write epic fantasy, so they're not my target audience. So categories were the first thing to change. I moved all of the books out of the adult categories on Amazon and into the YA section. There aren't as many subcategories for YA fiction, but they're nicely organized, so maybe it'll make it easier for people to find my books. The categories I immediately chose were epic fantasy and Arthurian fantasy, because following a mentor's advice and seeking a legendary sword that can be used to unify kingdoms and save the world and stuff that's a pretty solid fit for both of those. And for the third category, I wasn't sure if I should go with coming of age or sword and sorcery, because both fit. This series is very heavily Legend of Zelda inspired, and as my friend Elaine said, because it leans more toward Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, it's definitely got some sword and sorcery flavor in the mix. So ultimately I did a combination. Some of the books are in the sword and sorcery category as a chosen category, and others are in the coming of age category, but I made sure to use keywords that would let the books be found in either one of those categories. I do still need to change the categories for the paperbacks printed through Ingram, but I also need to update the covers with current pricing information because the prices have changed as part of the audit, and they need new cover copies, so that's going to take me a bit to get done, especially since you still have to pay for changes on Ingram. Revising the cover copy was the next step for my series audit. While the sales copy I had was okay, the blurb can always be better, and I wanted it to be as tight and impactful as I could make it. The only blurb that I worked on changing was the one for book 1, because the ones that come later in the series matter less. Like, if someone starts the first book in an epic fantasy series and enjoys it, then that's usually what gets them through the rest of the series, not necessarily the description that you write. So by the time they get to book 6, I could probably even just write, you know, the adventure concludes or whatever, and it wouldn't make a huge difference, because 6 books in, they're pretty hooked. And that's not to say that sales copy doesn't matter for later books, just that spending tons of time obsessing over blurbs for later books isn't going to be something that makes a big difference at all. If they like this, they're going to keep reading. So again, I got some help from my friend Elaine. She wrote some suggested revisions for the blurb I already had, which wasn't bad, and obviously it had moved a few copies of the book already. But then from her description, I built off of her suggestions and I finished a new version of the blurb that removed some pieces that didn't really add value. They were just wasted words, kind of filler. And I ended up with a stronger worded blurb than what I started with. So there's no helping these copies that I already have on hand, but whenever I do in-person events, I can always print a small standing description of the book that uses the new blurb so that people who are coming and seeing me in person will at least have access to the most up-to-date version. And of course, special thanks to 𝗯cie for going over all of this with me. It really helped. The hardest step in the audit was changing the keywords. As I already said, I used my keywords to help the books appear in other related categories, since you can only choose 3. But that doesn't mean it'll only show up in 3. Once upon a time, Amazon actually had a page where you could see the keywords that you needed to use to get into specific subcategories that you can't choose on their little drop-down menu. I don't know if it's still there or not because I haven't looked, but I did read it before and most of them were just using the category name as a key phrase. So I just wrote sword and sorcery and coming of age as keywords that I used on all of the books. Amazon likes it when your keywords are given in an order readers might search for in the Amazon store, so I made sure to keep those phrases paired up. And then I put all my keywords into a keyword organizer site so it automatically arranged them and put them in an order that got me as close to using 50 characters in each keyword slot as possible. You get 7 keyword slots on Amazon, and it helps to stuff those as full as you can because a line that says legendary sword, magic artifacts, chosen one, magic will still allow Amazon to pick out particular phrases as long as they are grouped together properly. There are tools available to do keyword research, but not a lot of free options, so I just used a private browser window to visit Amazon so it wouldn't be affected by the algorithm already established by my account. Then I looked for books that I thought were similar to mine in the YA categories, and from there I just kind of scanned their book descriptions and titles for keywords I thought might fit my series. You can't use another book's title as a keyword, but you can look for like commonalities to give you ideas. So like a book is titled Dragon Slayer. I have a dragon in my series, so let's put dragon in the keywords. This book has a magical sword, so does mine. That goes in the keywords. So I checked my list against stuff that I thought people might actually search for, like YA epic fantasy with dragons. And I built my keyword lists from that. Last of all, I made sure my pricing was competitive within my genre. I only looked at indie authors, and honestly my prices might still be a little low. All of my ebooks for this series are priced at $4.99, which I think is a great price point because it's easy to sell someone on $5 even if you aren't a familiar author. But a lot of indies are pushing epic fantasy higher once they get a little bit more established. I see a lot as high as like $7.99. But $4.99 is probably right where I need to be at the moment, at least until the series gains traction and has some more social proof. There are enough similar titles available at that price point that I won't look like suspiciously low priced, which might make readers think that my book isn't good quality. But I did notice that the paperbacks skewed like a lot higher in price. Both indie and traditionally published epic fantasy books were all a lot closer to a range of like $18 to $25 per book. And that's probably partly because printing prices have gone up so much in the past year or two, and they're getting ready to go up again in February. When I started publishing this series, a $15 paperback, $15 was pretty standard for a book, but with printing costs increasing, that price point no longer brings in a reasonable royalty. So I did increase my paperback prices to $18 to start with. And that means that for every paperback I sell, I make the same amount of money as I do off of an ebook, instead of bringing in pennies like they were doing, and it also means that I'm priced competitively, and that's something I'll have to keep an eye on, and I'll probably adjust the price upward again if necessary. It'll probably end up landing right around $20, but I think $18 is a good starting point to seem, competitive and affordable compared to other books currently in the genre. So now the series is fully up to speed, it's polished and adjusted to fit the current market, so the next step is going to be exploring my marketing options. I'm still thinking this through. One of the first things that came to mind was like doing a BookBub featured deal, or at least trying to get one, but I've never turned a profit on a BookBub deal, so I don't know if I want to try that again. But I've also never run a book in the YA categories, just the adult fantasy categories, and I might have more success in YA. I'll be posting the series some more on social media, but beyond that, I'm gonna need to do some brainstorming for how to handle getting this series actually in front of readers' eyes. At the moment, I'm kind of lacking on ideas, but I'll think on it and hopefully something will come to me, because this is the year for marketing, so I have to start figuring this out. All of this is something that I'm going to have to test and report back on in the future, but this is all for today. So if you want to know how the changes that I've made today affect the series, make sure you subscribe, ring the bell so you get notifications when I have updates to share, and I'll see you next time. Bye.